All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're cracking open one of history's greatest cold cases, the mysterious disappearance of our closest ancient relatives, the Neanderthals.
And you've got to let that number sink in. 350,000 years. I mean, to put that into perspective, that is way, way longer than we, Homo sapiens, have even been around. For hundreds of thousands of years, in a world that was pretty harsh and unforgiving, they were the undisputed masters.
And look, you have to get that image of the brutish, dumb caveman out of your head. That's just cartoon stuff. These guys were master survivors. They actually invented a kind of Stone Age superglue for their spears. They had complex tools, a real culture, and they even buried their dead.
I mean, their bodies were literally tailor-made for the Ice Age. They were stocky, super muscular, and science shows they were much, much better at holding on to body heat than the lanky modern humans who showed up later.
So you've got this group. They're tough, they're smart, they're perfectly adapted. And then, around 40,000 years ago, poof, they just vanish from the fossil record. So what happened? Okay, let's dive in. To solve this mystery, we've got to line up the main suspects.
So, in our investigation, we're going to look at three prime suspects. First, a rival species. Second, a planet that was changing dramatically. And third, a threat they couldn't even see. Invisible killers.
Okay, suspect number one. Us. Well, our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens. Around 45,000 years ago, we show up in Europe. And the timing? Well, it's more than a little suspicious. Almost as soon as we arrive on the scene, they start to disappear.
So, one theory is pretty simple: conquest. Modern humans came in with new tech like lighter-throwing spears. And there's some really chilling evidence for this. Check out this 50,000-year-old Neanderthal rib bone from a cave in Iraq. It has a gash from a sharp point that came from above, a wound that looks exactly like it was made by a spear thrown by a human. This might just be the world's oldest cold case.
But hold on, a full-on war seems kind of unlikely. Don't forget, Neanderthals were stronger, they knew the land inside and out, and their heavy spears were absolutely lethal up close. So maybe it wasn't a big, violent takeover. Maybe it was something a little more subtle.
And this brings us to a totally different idea. What if the Neanderthals weren't wiped out? What if they were absorbed? The scientific term for this is genetic dilution.
So how would that even work? Well, scientists have run these mathematical models, and they show that all it would take is small, repeated waves of modern humans moving into Neanderthal territory. Think about it. A small group of Neanderthals meets a slightly bigger group of modern humans. They interbreed. Their kids have less Neanderthal DNA. Now you just repeat that process over and over for thousands of years, and eventually that original Neanderthal genome just kind of fades into the much, much larger human gene pool.
Okay, let's put suspect number one on the back burner for a second and turn to our next suspect. What if the real culprit wasn't another human at all, but the world itself?
Now, the evidence for this theory comes from a pretty wild place: ancient stalagmites in European caves. You see, these things grow in tiny layers, year after year, and they trap a perfect chemical record of the climate. And they show two sudden, really extreme cold snaps, one right at 44,000 years ago and another at 40,800. I mean, that timeline matches the Neanderthal decline almost perfectly.
So these weren't just chilly winters. These cold spells literally turned forests into frozen, Arctic-like plains. For Neanderthals, this was a catastrophe. Why? Because they were specialists. They hunted big game like bison and deer, and suddenly their food source just vanished. Modern humans, on the other hand, we were more flexible. We had a much more diverse diet. Plants, fish, smaller animals, you name it. So when the main course on the menu disappeared, we could still find something else to eat.
But there's one more suspect we have to consider. This is one that leaves no wounds, no spear points, no fossil records at all.
We're talking about disease.
Think about it like this. When modern humans left Africa, our bodies were carrying a whole host of germs and pathogens that we had built up immunity to over thousands of years. But to Neanderthals, these diseases were totally new, and genetic evidence suggests we might have brought them some nasty stuff: tapeworms, tuberculosis, stomach ulcers, even the herpes virus.
Now, we're not talking about some fast-acting plague that wiped everyone out in a few weeks. No, this was probably something much slower. These were likely chronic illnesses that would have constantly weakened the small, scattered Neanderthal groups. It would have lowered their birth rates, made them less successful hunters, and just tipped that delicate balance of survival against them.
So who did it? Was it us? Was it the climate? Was it disease? Well, the evidence points to a different conclusion.
It wasn't a single killer. It was a perfect storm of factors that hit a population that was, frankly, already in trouble.
And here's the thing you absolutely have to understand. Even before modern humans showed up or the climate went crazy, Neanderthal populations were already really small and isolated from each other. And this made them super vulnerable to a few things. Inbreeding, which can cause all sorts of health problems, something called the Ollie effect, where your population is so small it's just hard to find a mate, and honestly, just plain old bad luck.
So you've got this small, vulnerable population already living on the edge. Then, bam, they get hit by rapid climate change that messes up their entire food supply. At the exact same time, they're being exposed to brand new diseases, and to top it all off, they're facing competition from and eventually being absorbed by a much larger, more adaptable population of modern humans. It wasn't one thing, it was the perfect storm.
So no single event killed them. It was more like a slow fade over millennia, a death by 1,000 cuts. But their story doesn't actually end there. Not completely. In fact, a part of them is still with us today. Which brings us to this number. What do you think it is?
That 1 to 4%, that's the amount of Neanderthal DNA that most modern humans with ancestry outside of Africa carry around inside them right now. They weren't just erased from history, they were absorbed. Their story became a part of our story. So in a very real way, their legacy lives on, inside of you.